Hello, I'm Harley. I'm here with Dave, and we're speaking today to James Morcan, the director and writer of Anno 2020. So, how are you?
I'm delighted to be here in Melbourne. It's been here a while. It's been a while since I've been here, and we're gonna have a sold out cinema tonight, and that follows a sold out screening in Sydney. So for basically a no budget movie, this is
Wow.
unexpected and incredible for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing, actually. Like what you sort of mentioned to me already.
Hmm.
No budget. You were going around through COVID,
Yeah.
getting this done, and also you're a first-time director. So, tell us a bit how the project got started.
Okay, so I was in pre-production with the producer of this film called Gil Ben Moshe, and that was on a pre-production on another movie, and then, like we all experienced, lockdowns happened and projects ended and so on. Then I just started to observe what was happening and thought, hang on, there's something here. So I actually started by writing a novel, and then late in 2020, I started to reach out to actors around the world and say, well, I'm thinking of adapting this into a movie. But I was really, really brutally honest with them that we went to a few financiers. This was too obscure a project because it's improvised. People were scared of financing anything during the pandemic era. And it's a highly unorthodox movie. It's quite experimental. And therefore I was so honest with them that I said we may not even be able to finish this, but I'm going to go on this journey. Do you want to come with me? And I think some of them, especially in LA, appreciated the no bullshit sort of approach.
Yeah.
And from there, yeah, people just not only did they come on board, but we attracted a lot of actor producers. These were people that were quite quiet during this
Oh,
time, and they made up for the lack of finance by they had cameras, they had TV studios around the world, and then here we shot 40% of it here in Sydney, and we shot in Gold Coast and Kangaroo Island, South Australia.
oh wow.
Yeah, and that was a case where putting all together, so 40% here, 60% around the world, and everything around the world we couldn't travel there, so that was remote. So I was directing them. If there's film crews, I was directing them via Zoom or other technologies, and then these are scenes where often we've got multiple characters around the world acting at once as well. So
Yeah.
it's like replicating how we were all communicating during the pandemic.
For those that haven't seen the film, what was it about the pandemic that kind of sparked that idea for you? Was it the lockdowns that we were going through, or what was it that kind of sparked it?
Well, I would say that this everything in this movie, or most of it, could have been told before the pandemic. So
Yep.
it's really stories about the human condition, and I didn't really want to get into a lockdown movie, but it's more that when you have that it's more in the background at all times. It heightens the intensity of these stories and some of them were ones that I'd sort of had in the back of my mind I wanted to tell for a while. But it's a vignette movie, so there's many stories in one. Yeah.
So, you wrote the novel first. How quickly did that come out? Was it prompted by COVID, or did you actually already have that written and then it just fit?
No, everything was inspired by what was happening, and it just came through me really fast. But I wanted to purposely underwrite the story as well. So that sounds like a weakness on the surface, but what that does is it allows it. Basically, I turned the actors into storytellers with me. So it's a different sort of approach where the characters became quite autobiographical as well, and I was using their stories. So it really so underwriting allows you to then launch off it, and everyone tells a story with me rather than just saying, "Hey, I've got everything. Do as I say." You know?
That's really cool. And
Yeah.
it sounds like it was like lucky timing as well. Because I don't imagine you would have had as much success getting a project like this off the ground if everyone was busy doing the usual free reign, making a crappy blockbuster for Marvel or something like
I
that.
think I mean all these actors. We've got some fairly big ones from the US working in the Hollywood system, and then Israel, China, and so on, and then locally and Italy as well. But all these actors are now very, very busy. So I think you're 100% right. I think it was a case where they were going, what, we're able to keep filming, we're able to shoot something. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that process work for you, reaching out to people right around the world to be part of the project? How did you go about doing that process?
It was mainly two sites I used, so LinkedIn and Backstage. Have you heard of that?
Yep.
Yeah. And I found that, like, Backstage, for example, there was one role where we had a 20-something American actress we needed, and we got, I remember I stopped looking after 300 submissions, but we had about 500 for that one role, and I was going, and I'd already chosen the one I wanted after about halfway through.
Yeah.
But the level of actresses they were in all sorts, like those big soaps and that, major roles, and then so they were just so keen. So Backstage is one for other filmmakers I really recommend.
Definitely.
That's actually really cool. So basically you put a blurb up about your project and people were just responding to that.
Yeah, but I did it in such a way where I said, look, so this is kind of a cannibalistic industry, if I could say that, in that it kind of eats their own, where everyone's looking to use people and so on. I did admit that we're basically a no-budget movie. Like, our total budget is $6,000 US, which is anything below 25 they call a no budget.
Yeah.
Above that it's like a micro, and then you get into low budget, but this is way down. And so I was honest about that, but then at the same time I said, you'll be a producer as well, you'll be sharing in back end and so on, so it's for most of them at least. And that was approach where you're going, okay, so you're not getting paid up front, but it's more like a cooperative. And so I think that they really appreciated that, and they're not used to that. And also, when they're improvising a lot, they all get writing credits as well, because they're coming up with so much that stuff I would have written, you know.
That's right. I really like that, actually, as a model. I kind of heard of people trying to start like a collective, like a creative collective, before doing stuff like this. Was that sort of thing in your mind to begin with, or did it just happen out of...
No, it's something from other movies I've been looking at for about a decade, thinking about it. Talk to other producers, and they never want to do it. They never want to share anything. Yeah. They're greedy. And I always thought this would be possible, and I think this is possible at a higher budget level. There's a guy in America, he does all the low-budget horror movies consistently. He's a top guy. It's just his name's escaped me. But he does this there's a different level you can do this. So his movies, they should be worth about 10 million budgets, right? But he does them for about $1 million. They always return hundreds of millions, or pretty much always. But the deal is, even people like Ethan Hawke, they all take scale, just minimum wage, but they're in on the back end.
Yeah.
And the agents even understand this, so it's a different model that I think is useful. Yeah.
This is your first time directing, so your debut. Did it kind of worry you that this was so left of center with the way that you were doing it? Like, or did that actually make it easier because you hadn't directed a traditional film previously? Yeah,
that's a complicated question to answer, because I think in some ways it was harder and like there was no roadmap. Even we've got our cinematographer here, Simon Carter, but he was also the editor with me, and we were working on a lot of stuff, and after a while we realized there's no movie we can reference with this. It just hasn't been done. So in that way it was harder, but in other ways, because my background is I'm an actor as well, therefore this movie was very focused on actors, so I think it was a good one to start with. So yeah.
And how did that help you as well? I know I've spoken to a few actors over the years that have directed, and they said that their acting background has been a great help for when they start directing. Did you find that as well? Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with actors. And also being a writer, I found the editing process was quite smooth to me. But the challenges is, as I said, we shot 40% of this movie mostly by a traditional camera shoot here in Australia. And that's where, I had to work a lot with my DOP. And, directors come from different backgrounds. You get someone like a George Lucas, who's very, very technical, but then not so even interested necessarily in the acting. Then you get people like myself, and so I think every director has their strengths and weaknesses, and it's trying to... This was a good project for me to debut with, I feel, and then I move into something which is a lot more traditional. Yeah. Did you feel you had any drawbacks personally? Like, for me, I would be fine. I'm good with actors, but the technical side and, being a lover of science fiction and stuff, I always love those behind the scenes things where I find out how they do stuff. That I'm like, going in, would I have the first idea of where to begin? Was there anything like that on your mind, like that you might not know where to begin, or? I think I would go back to just the fact that this is a real multimedia movie. So once again, I had to really collaborate closely with my DOP, because
it's a case where we were actually doing a lot of experimenting in pre-production, going, how would you do this? What would it look like? So, for example, even when people are having Zoom conversations, do they look exactly into the lens? Do they look at the... And these were like little things that you take for granted, but it was actually quite complicated. How will it appear on screen? We had to figure this out before we started shooting, you see. And that's where, you have to have... For someone of my sort of background, so acting, writing, when you get into directing, you have to surround yourself with a lot of technical experts. And that's something that I'm trying to get better at. But as I say, this movie was a good one to start with because it's basically primarily focused on it's an acting and editing movie. Like the editing was a nightmare. I wasn't afraid of it because I'm a novelist as well. So you get into novels like 1,000 pages, you got to figure things out. But at the same time, after we'd been editing for say a couple of months, I asked Simon, like, where are we at? What have we got? We had an 8.5-hour movie. Now that's what I was expecting. That's pretty epic. But I was expecting that because we were just grabbing everything around the world. People were offering stuff, and I was just taking it and going, well, I don't know what we're going to do in the edit, but let's grab it. If it's there, let's grab, sorry.
I was going to say, it's almost like documentary filmmaking. Like when I interview documentary filmmakers, they'll say the hardest part is they'll end up with like 40 hours or hundreds of hours worth of footage, and then they're like, how do I make this into a 90-minute film? Was that kind of what you had to go through too?
That's very perceptive because most of my directing mentors are people who either double up in documentary filmmaking or they are that.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough to be in the edit suite with them and seeing how they operate, and that's how I knew that you can actually tell the story in reverse. So Hollywood's got this thing: if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage.
Yeah.
But hopefully movies like this can debunk that. And I think also the history of filmmaking, if you go back to 70s films, say like Apocalypse Now, there was a 6-hour version, for example. These type of films, they were doing this a lot, and it's kind of been forgotten. And this is in some ways, this is a cutting edge movie in that we're using all this multimedia. But in other ways, I think it's a bit of a throwback to that, in that you can, and documentary filmmakers also prove this, that you can tell a lot of the story as you see all the footage rather than always on the page. Now, don't get me wrong, other movies, I've got scripts I've been working with for years that I want to execute that.
Yeah.
But I think this one, especially that we were kind of like the equivalent of undercover journalists, in that each actor was embedded in these environments around the world, that we were getting a lot of happy accidents that we wanted to capitalize on, grab it, and then work it out in the edit.
And I think they end up being some of your best moments. I find that sometimes it's like, you don't mean that, but it's too good. You have to keep that in there.
100%. Yeah, but it can become a major headache in the edit. Don't get me wrong.
Absolutely.
Like this is why like we kind of cheated in that we fast tracked the writing, but then you suffer for it in the edit. This took us 2 years to edit, and it was the hardest thing. Yeah.
So the fact that I mean, when I actually saw the trailer myself, I thought this kind of borders like documentary in my mind, but I know you'd written the novel, so I'm like, how does this work? So was there any kind of confusion for you about how you wanted to approach it, or was it just happened, it was there kind of form?
No, I think the writing still gives us I'm a big believer in improvisation where it's necessary, but I also think even when we replace the writing, it still is a roadmap. And then so the actors are informed by that. They read the novel, they got their characterizations on a deep level from the novel, and then we start then you build on that and you evolve it. So although I think it can feel a little bit documentary-like because we're covering a real event.
Yep.
So say a movie like JFK by Oliver Stone, that's the sort of same thing where you've got real stuff in there. So there is a bit of a docudrama feel there, but then overall I would say it's a regular fictional movie. Yeah.
Yep. So just going back a bit on getting it up and running, like first time director and everything, do you feel like you've achieved what you wanted to in the first place? Like, do you imagine, I know it would have been very different if the world was in a different place at the time. Do you feel you've got where you wanted with this and you're ready for more?
Yeah, I honestly feel whatever I do from here, I'll never do better than, like for this particular movie, for what it was, for the subject matter, and that I couldn't be happier. And I say that in in terms of primarily the people I work with. I work with geniuses that these people could be writers in their own regard. Some of them have directed. They come, whether they were behind the camera or in front. So I just got the most incredible team that it seemed like they'd been waiting for this too.
Yeah.
So we just crafted, in my opinion, absolutely everything I could have possibly wanted. Yeah. And I'm to the point where if I'd had $1 million budget, I am scratching my head going, what more could I have got?
Do you think that
I'm
would
not
have...
kidding. It's bemusing to me, you know.
Do you think that would have helped or maybe negatively impacted what came out?
Well, I used to hear before I directed, I'd heard a lot of directors who make the progression. You know, they start out with a 50,000 movie, and they often say, you know, I was never more creative than when I did, and I never understood that. But now that I've gone through it, I understand that it's kind of like a mindset thing. Like right now, if we were about to do a movie together, let's say, and we had 600,000. There's a certain mindset that if it was 60 million, you kind of go, well, we don't have to dig as deep. We don't have to. It's so. I think as you go up, it gets messy, and it's so. But I think, and I like doing this. I'd rather do this than go straight to that because this is a great experience. And now I also know what's possible, and what's not. So if someone tells me we can't do that, I can kind of go, well, we can. But yeah.
A director said to me once about that had gone from doing small budget films to larger budget films, and he said he finds that when you've got a larger budget, you start to fake more. So he said when he was a young filmmaker, it's like, right, we need to film this in an old rundown house. So he'd go and find an old rundown house and film there. But he said once he got to Hollywood, it'd be like, we need an old rundown house. Okay, we'll build a sound studio to match that. So he said, the more money you have, the more you start to fake it. And he's realized going back now that he wishes he could go back to the more indie times.
Wow.
So,
okay. Yeah, I'm hearing similar. So I don't know. I mean, I think the goal would be to take some of this mindset forward and do a bit of a hybrid,
How difficult was it to film the stuff here in Australia during the pandemic? Because I know I had to do an interstate trip during that time, and it was a nightmare. So how did you go about doing that? And were you worried about border closures and things like that?
Extremely worried, because sometimes we had to get actors that they started off in the Gold Coast, for example. Erin Connor is one example, and she had to get to Sydney, and we had to wait about 12 or 18 months. But we shot this over such a long period of time that we could... Do you remember that it'd be a case where New South Wales would be open and then Queensland would be closed, and we had to sync things. And sometimes it was just, we had like a week where we had to get a shot or a scene,
Were there any positives filming during that time? Because I was talking to Harley on the way here, and a friend of mine knows a filmmaker who was shooting a post-apocalyptic movie, and he said it was the perfect time to film it in Melbourne because the streets were empty. Like, were there pros to filming during that time?
Yeah, there were. I mean, especially we did it guerrilla style. Like, you'll see that there's one sequence where we got into Grand Central Station, and it was totally empty, which is never empty.
Wow.
And we captured that stuff, and you couldn't do that if they were doing it with permits and all that. But guerrilla is just run and gun.
Yeah.
But there were other benefits as well. So there was a couple of scenes we shot late in the editing, and I had to say that, look, I'm not feeling it here because I'm not feeling the same, and the actors really weren't either, and the spirit had gone. So I would say that we had the intensity of what's happening to the world we don't know. We were able to channel that into the film.
That's good, actually. And being right in the time and the setting, you must be feeding off that really well, I think.
Yeah, like another example would be we had a actor who was playing a journalist, and he was right there when on May 26, 2020, which was where they shut down a boulevard in Washington, D.C. for Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
So rather than recreating that, he was there. So there's an example where as I say, it's like a journalist embedded in a war zone. It would be hard to recapture those things.
Yeah.
So this fits the technique called cinema verite, where you don't recreate the world. You actually say the world's there and go into it.
The film is almost has a feel of a time capsule in a sense. Like, is that something that you're aware of, that like you've kind of time capsuled that period of time where it felt for all of us in the middle of it such a weird time?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting observation you make, because it's something that I've become more aware of now that we're a few years from it and looking back at the footage and going, that looks weird, but we all got used to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We got used to those scenes, but now... And it is something that I've thought about also, that maybe in 20 years' time it would be good. I wanted to make a film that children could look at and see, oh, that's what my parents or grandparents went through.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I'm going to skip tack a little bit here, just because I'm always interested in learning. So, and I know there are so many people out there who want to become directors, actors, that sort of thing. As your first film proper, do you have any advice for them about going into it, and even just the attitude to have?
Yeah, I think I mean I was happy. I had opportunities because I'm a screenwriter as well. There was a few that I maybe could have made when I was younger. So I'm 45 now, but I'm kind of glad I didn't rush that because I feel directors need a broad classical education of the arts. So because when you're doing it, you're talking with, it could be the sound designer, you're talking to the composer, you're writing it. So you need to know literature, you need to know music. That's the way I look at directing. So I think it's piecing all those things together and never stop learning, never, every bit you get, whether you work with, if you don't come from an acting background, if you can just work one day with actors, all these different things you pick up, then when you suddenly get your chance, you can put all those together. But you don't want to be in a situation where you get your chance and you go, oh my God, I don't know this, I don't know that. And other than that, I think, I mean, if you look what I've done, this is just a self-finance one as well with myself and Gil Ben Moshe. So it's a bit of a case where, you know, you've got to be prepared to do, it's the tenacity and just, I'll find a way. And I think it's better to get started, but not with junk. But if you're confident you've got something quality, get a first feature under your belt.
Yep.
Do you want...
Okay.
No?
Okay.
Yeah, just sort of writing off that. You were talking about, you know, all the stuff you wanted to know, getting that broad sort of education in things. And now I've been doing this since David and I were back at TAFE together in the day. I always wanted to know everything, every part of how to do everything, which is ridiculous because I couldn't do everything. But it kind of sounds like you had a little bit of that attitude, like wanting to know how things worked. And did you find that helped you, or did there get to any point where you thought, I need to step back and let someone else do that?
Yeah, I think in the situations where you can't execute it yourself, it's still good to know know something about it, because you can talk to them and support them. A lot of directing is supporting, and so there were many things I couldn't do on this, and that's another thing. Besides the actors, we got some of the best, like our color grader, for example, one of the best in Australia. And all these, so you bring in, that's why this took us a long time, was we had the motto, which it sounds like a cliche and everyone's got, but it's no compromise. And so there were times where we just delayed, we can't get the right people, and it's months we're waiting, but we eventually find them. So when you get the best in the field, then you don't need to be, you got to watch trying to do everything. I'm not like that.
Yeah.
You know, and you got to know when, even for example with directing actors, there's some people don't realize that sometimes if you say nothing in a take, that is the directing decision. So I often find, because I'm an actor myself, I know that when everyone's talking and a director comes up like this, I'm just like, I can't process it all. So sometimes if it's working, I just go yep and go again, and that is a directing decision. So I think a lot of it is knowing when to just step back, and if you've got some of the best artists in the world in front of you, let them roll.
Is there anything you think you had to learn at the time, like even working with actors? Did you find a point where you thought, oh, this is where I don't say anything, or this is where I need to step back and let them do their thing? Is there any lessons you can sort of talk about?
I think watching a lot of footage, because I like to have all the between takes footage as well, so we never stop the camera rolling, and I would watch that back because we were editing the movie as we went rather than waiting to the end. And so I was watching myself, listening to myself, going, whoa, do I speak like that? Why am I? And so that I've probably, like you guys, even with the podcast, I imagine you listen back, and I imagine if you listen to your first podcast compared to now, it's like it's kind of like that. Yeah.
So, big question, I suppose a lot of our listeners are wondering, the film has done so well on the film festival circuit. Where to now for the film? What's the next steps now?
Yeah, well, we're kind of doing it the old school way, where we have our full cinema release first, and it's obviously just limited cinema. So we had Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. We may have more in Australia, then there's possibility of New Zealand, and then we are talking to distributors, and it will appear on streaming, I would say, mid to late this year. But at this stage, it's just limited cinema. Yeah.
Yep. Are you able to tell us a little bit about the limited cinema? Like what, like will it be have like one night screenings or will it be short seasons? What's the plan there?
Just I think at least one screening in most of the cities,
Yep.
and then maybe more in Sydney. We'll see how we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, we need to make sure everyone knows to look for you then. Yeah, look, keep us updated with sort of dates and things, and we'll get them published to everyone too.
Sure. Great.
Anything else you want to say?
Yeah, I guess for my final question, I'd like to ask, what would you like to say to people who are going to sit down and watch the film? Is there something you want them to take away from the film, or?
More that it's just a different approach in that it's pretty epic and it's more about, everyone sort of says like, does it move the story forward? But I think with us, it's more, does it move the characterizations forward?
Yeah.
It's that type of film, so character-based story. That's what to expect.
Yep.
Actually, that's important, I think, from what you've been saying, especially because it is a real moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, unless you're going to really change what happened, can you move it forward? No,
Yeah.
It is about the characters, isn't it?
I think that's another cliche, a bit like, if it ain't on the page, it ain't on stage.
Yeah.
It's like, does it move? There's some of the best scenes in cinema history, I don't think necessarily they're a bit of a tangent, that the director did, but it's a great moment. It doesn't always have to project the story forward in an amazing way.
Sounds good. Well, I know we're looking forward to it. So everyone out there, we hope you get a chance to see Anno 2020. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.